I was never the type to spark drama in my neighborhood, but the day my packages started disappearing, everything changed. At first, I blamed porch pirates, until a tiny detail made it clear the thief wasn't a stranger at all. It was someone with access. Someone who walked by my house every single day. Someone who thought their HOA title made them untouchable. What she didn't know was that I had finally decided to fight back. And the trap I set would expose her in a way she never saw coming. Before everything spiraled into chaos, life in my neighborhood felt almost predictable. The kind of place where lawns looked copy and paste perfect, holiday decor appeared in synchronized waves, and everyone pretended the HOA existed for community harmony, rather than micromanaging every inch of our lives. I had moved there for peace, stability, and the comforting illusion that rules would make the neighborhood feel safe. And for a while, it worked. My home felt like a sanctuary. Quiet mornings, easy routines, and the simple pleasure of coming back to a front porch that always held exactly what I expected to find. I lived alone, but never felt isolated. I worked long hours from home, and online deliveries basically kept my life running. Groceries, tools, equipment, home office gadgets, they all came straight to my doorstep. And because the neighborhood was gated and well lit, I never worried about theft. Packages always sat neatly on the welcome mat when I got home from errands, untouched and undisturbed. That reliability made the community feel safe, even if the HOA could be a little overbearing about trash bin placement or holiday lights. There was an order to everything. People waved while walking their dogs, sprinklers chirped in the early mornings, and occasionally, the HOA president sent out long emails about upholding neighborhood standards that most people skimmed and ignored. I didn't mind. If anything, I appreciated the structure, until I learned how quickly structure can turn into control. Things began shifting in subtle ways long before the real conflict started. A few residents mentioned increased monitoring, though no one explained what that meant. The HOA president, a woman I only knew by reputation, had become more visible around the neighborhood. Walking the sidewalks with a clipboard, snapping pictures of overgrown shrubs or unapproved paint colors. Some people joked that she enjoyed her role a little too much. Others whispered that she was hunting for rule breakers just to justify her authority. I tried not to think much of it. I kept my yard neat, my exterior approved, and my life quiet. I was the last person the HOA would bother, or so I believed. Around this time, my deliveries started increasing. I had taken on new projects for work, and I needed equipment shipped in regularly. Large boxes, small packages, specialty items, all of it came right to my doorstep. For weeks, nothing seemed unusual. But every time I walked outside to check my porch, I noticed something strange. My neighbors always seemed to be watching. Not in a friendly, curious way. More like they were tracking activity they didn't usually care about. I brushed it off as coincidence. Maybe people were just outside more. Maybe I was overthinking because I'd read too many HOA horror stories online. Life continued normally, until the first package disappeared. I still remember the confusion I felt as I scanned the porch, convinced I had just overlooked it. There was no broken tape, no sign of forced entry, nothing spilled or scattered. Just empty space. At first, I assumed a delivery error. Maybe a driver who left the box at the wrong address. I filed a claim, got a refund, and went back to work. But then it happened again. And again. And again. 4 packages vanished in 2 weeks. All different sizes, all different delivery companies. It made no sense. The neighborhood was monitored. We had cameras at every gate. We had security patrols at night. And yet, somehow, porch thieves were hitting my home repeatedly while everyone else's property remained untouched. Something felt wrong. Not random. Not opportunistic. Targeted. I started paying closer attention. I checked my porch more often. I noted the times deliveries arrived. I inspected the bushes and corners near my door, half expecting to find something I'd missed before. Footprints, discarded packaging. Anything. But there were never signs. It was like the packages vanished the moment they touched the ground. The tipping point came when I installed a small motion sensor near the porch. Nothing fancy, nothing covert. Just a simple device to alert me if someone approached while I wasn't looking. It triggered twice that week. Both times at moments when I didn't expect deliveries, and both times showing nothing when I checked outside. The sensor logs confirmed movement, but whoever it was moved fast enough to avoid every angle I could see. That's when I began noticing the HOA president more often. She always seemed to appear during the strangest moments. Walking past my home right after a delivery. Pausing at the end of my driveway for no clear reason. Glancing a little too long at my porch when she thought no one was looking. She carried that clipboard as if it were an extension of herself, and every time she made a note, I felt the uneasy prickle of being evaluated. The more I watched her, the more something felt off. Her routes didn't match the usual neighborhood strolls. She always passed by the homes that received frequent packages. Mine was at the top of the list. I didn't have proof yet, just a growing suspicion. But it was enough to make me reconsider everything I thought I knew about my safe community. If someone with authority was misusing it, then the comfort I once felt here was nothing but a facade. And if the person responsible for protecting residents was the same person benefiting from the chaos, then I wasn't just dealing with package theft. I was dealing with power, misused, unchecked, and hiding in plain sight. I didn't know it yet, but the moment I decided to investigate was the moment this quiet, predictable neighborhood would become the center of a battle I never asked for. Because the truth wasn't just petty. It was personal. And whatever was happening on my porch was only the beginning of something much bigger. The shift from mild suspicion to full-blown paranoia happened faster than I wanted to admit. Once the idea settled that someone inside the neighborhood, someone with access, was taking my packages, every strange noise outside felt intentional. Every footstep on the sidewalk sounded like it paused a little too long in front of my house. And every time my porch camera failed to catch anything useful, I felt the tension ratchet up another notch. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that it was probably just a delivery mix-up or a bored kid. But then the HOA got involved, and everything changed. It started subtly, the way most HOA problems do. A note appeared on my door, folded neatly, printed with the HOA letterhead and the kind of passive, aggressive tone only a committee could master. It said my home had been flagged for excessive delivery traffic, which was apparently creating an unseemly visual disruption for the neighborhood. I stared at the paper in disbelief. Excessive traffic. It wasn't like trucks lined up outside my house. They dropped a box, drove off, and that was it. Invisible compared to the loud landscapers who blasted through the neighborhood twice a week. But the HOA president didn't see it that way. The next day, I got a fine, not a warning, not a suggestion, an actual fine, for improper package storage. I thought I misread it. How could I improperly store something that wasn't even there long enough for me to bring inside? After a long, frustrating call, the HOA insisted that leaving boxes on the porch for extended periods violated neighborhood aesthetic standards. When I asked how long, extended periods meant, I got a vague answer about reasonable expectations. Reasonable for who? Someone who didn't have their deliveries stolen. I tried to stay calm, tried to convince myself that these fines were just misguided, but things escalated quickly. Within days, I received another citation, this time for a suspicious setup on my front porch. The motion sensor I'd installed, the one meant to protect my missing packages. Apparently, it was non-compliant with HOA-approved exterior devices. Even though several neighbors openly used similar gadgets, it didn't take long to see the pattern. I was being singled out. Not the loud neighbors. Not the guy who left his trash can out for 3 days straight. Just me. The one whose packages kept disappearing, and it was more than just fines. The HOA president herself began appearing at my house more often. At first, it was subtle. Walking past at the exact moment a delivery arrived, then pausing at the edge of my driveway to jot something down, then lingering at the mailbox long enough to feel intrusive. One afternoon, I stepped outside just in time to catch her peering at my porch, clipboard in hand, as if she were cataloging every inch. She startled when she saw me, offered a tight smile, and said she was checking for compliance. The way she emphasized the word made my stomach twist. Something wasn't right. She wasn't checking compliance. She was watching me. The more she appeared, the more packages vanished. And the more packages vanished, the more the HOA fined me for losing them. It made no sense. Each citation grew increasingly absurd. One notice claimed that frequent delivery attempts caused unnecessary disturbances. Another insisted my porch was creating a visual liability because of the temporary absence of missing packages. I stared at that one for a long time, baffled by its circular logic. It became obvious someone was manipulating the system. Someone who had the authority to invent rules, bend them, and weaponize them against one person. And that someone was the same person who spent her days walking around the neighborhood with a clipboard. The HOA president. The same woman who conveniently appeared whenever a delivery truck pulled in. The same woman who seemed to have an unnatural interest in my front porch. My suspicion turned into near certainty when I caught her standing in front of my house, one evening past sunset, clearly unaware that I was watching from the window. She wasn't walking her usual route. She wasn't checking any other homes. She was staring directly at my porch. Waiting. What was she waiting for? That moment pushed me to take things seriously. I decided to expand my surveillance beyond what the HOA allowed. If the president really was behind the thefts, she clearly knew where the obvious cameras were. Which might explain why nothing ever showed up. She knew how to avoid them. So I bought a few tiny, camouflaged motion-triggered cameras. Nothing fancy, just discreet enough to blend with the environment. I installed them in places the HOA would never bother checking, behind a flower pot, in the slats of the porch railing, and one tucked on the side of the garage where the angle was perfect to catch anyone approaching from the sidewalk. I felt a strange mix of guilt and adrenaline. Guilt, because I knew the HOA would flip out if they discovered the cameras. Adrenaline, because it felt like I was setting the stage for a trap. One I hoped would catch whoever had been tormenting me. The next morning, I ordered something small, a decoy. A cheap item, barely worth $10, but something guaranteed to be delivered quickly. I wanted to see what would happen the moment it hit the porch. The delivery arrived at noon. I pretended I wasn't home. 40 minutes passed, then an hour. I checked the hidden camera feed from my phone. Nothing. The box sat there, untouched. But at precisely 2017 p.m., a familiar figure appeared on the sidewalk, walking slower than usual. The HOA president. Clipboard in hand, she paused by my driveway, looked at the package, looked around casually, stepped closer. My heart thudded in my chest as I watched the live footage. She stood on my porch like she was assessing it, then leaned down and lifted the box. Not to inspect it, not to check for damage. She tucked it under her arm and walked off with it, as calmly as if she were picking up a newspaper. There it was. Proof. My pulse raced with a mixture of validation and anger. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a porch pirate. It was the person supposedly responsible for community order. The same person who had fined me for having missing packages. I expected that finally having proof would bring relief. Instead, it made things worse. Because the moment I started planning what to do next, the HOA doubled down. The president sent me an official warning, claiming that my home was under heightened observation due to ongoing compliance concerns. Then she sent a letter outlining new temporary regulations for high traffic delivery recipients. Regulations that suspiciously applied only to me. Things like requiring packages to be picked up within 5 minutes of delivery, or mandating that I notify the HOA in advance if I expected a shipment, or forbidding own-approved surveillance devices, which I knew was aimed directly at me. She knew something. She didn't know about the hidden cameras yet, but she sensed that I was watching her. And she was trying to keep control. The tension reached a new peak when I received a notice stating that the HOA would be conducting a property inspection at my home. A thinly veiled excuse for her to get inside. I declined, citing the need for legal counsel. That only intensified her efforts. More threats, more fines, more surveillance. It was no longer just about stolen packages. It was about power, intimidation, and the desperate need of one person to maintain control at all costs. I realized that catching her on camera wasn't enough. She wouldn't admit anything. She wouldn't stop. She held the HOA in the palm of her hand. If I wanted justice, real, undeniable public justice, I needed a plan that didn't just expose her, but forced her to face consequences she couldn't wriggle out of. A trap wasn't just necessary. It had to be undeniable, irrefutable, and perfectly timed. One move that would show the entire neighborhood exactly who she was, and why she should never have been allowed to wield this much authority. And as I stared at the stolen package footage again, watching her walk away with something that wasn't hers, the idea clicked. Simple, effective, and impossible for her to escape. A trap she would never see coming. And this time, when she showed up to take what wasn't hers, she wouldn't be leaving with a box. She'd be leaving with the biggest humiliation of her HOA career. One that the entire community would witness. The plan was simple on paper. Bait, wait, expose. But executing it felt like stepping into a battlefield I never asked to fight on. By the time everything was ready, the tension in my stomach felt like coiled wire. Days of preparation had led to this one moment. The moment the HOA president would walk straight into the trap she believed she was smart enough to avoid. I had spent the entire week refining the setup. Cameras were positioned with surgical precision. The decoy package sat perfectly angled on the porch, designed to be irresistible to the person who took everything else. And inside that package was the final stroke. A harmless, but unforgettable surprise that would guarantee she never forgot the day she tried to steal from me again. She had no idea that I'd upgraded everything. No idea that multiple angles were streaming directly to a cloud backup. No idea that several neighbors, tired of her abuse, had agreed to watch from their windows at the exact hour she usually made her rounds. No idea that this time, she wasn't just walking away with a box. She was walking straight into a public unveiling of her own arrogance. The morning the trap went live, I ordered another inexpensive item, making sure the delivery was scheduled for the early afternoon. The exact window when she always struck. For hours, I watched the live camera feeds in silence, barely breathing. Every rustle of leaves felt like movement. Every passing car made my heart race. Then, finally, the delivery driver arrived. He placed the decoy box on the porch, snapped a photo, and drove off. The moment he disappeared down the street, the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Minutes dragged. 5, 10, 20. Still no sign of her. My chest tightened with a mix of anticipation and doubt. What if she changed her routine? What if she sensed something was different? What if all this planning came to nothing? Then at 3:11 p.m., right on schedule, a familiar silhouette appeared at the end of the street. Clipboard in hand. Sunglasses on. Walking with that stiff, self-appointed authority that made everyone brace whenever she approached. My blood pressure spiked. This was it. She stopped at the house across from mine, pretending to examine a perfectly trimmed hedge. Then she continued down the sidewalk, her pace steady, her posture confident. She slowed as she approached my driveway, glancing around just once. The same fake casual sweep she always used before doing something she shouldn't. Then she stepped onto my property. I watched the screen intensely as she approached the porch, eyes locked on the package. She leaned down, inspected it like she always did, making sure no one had written her name on it, as if that somehow made it licit. And then, with the same entitled motion I'd seen on the footage dozens of times, she lifted the box. But this time, she noticed something. The package was slightly heavier than normal. She shifted her grip, confused but not concerned enough to stop. And just as she tucked it under her arm and took the first step off my porch, the trap triggered. The box burst open with a sudden, targeted spray of harmless but extremely unpleasant natural Hornet attractant. A pungent, sticky blend that was widely used in pest control tests. There were no hornets in the box, of course, but the smell alone was enough to make someone panic. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. She shrieked and jerked backward, dropping the box as the spray coated her shirt. She flailed, swatting at the air as if an entire swarm had descended on her. She stumbled down the steps, landed on the walkway, and scrambled backward in a frantic crawl. The scene was shocking, chaotic, and, for the neighbors watching, impossible to ignore. Curtains twitched, doors opened, people stepped onto their porches, drawn by the noise and the spectacle of the HOA president, covered in sticky attractant and screaming as if she'd been attacked. And then came the moment that changed everything. From across the street, a neighbor called out, asking what she was doing on my porch. Another approached, phone in hand, already recording. A third yelled that he had seen her take packages before but hadn't wanted to get involved. Their voices overlapped, growing louder, angrier, more emboldened now that the mask had finally cracked. The HOA president tried to regain control, scrambling to her feet, babbling excuses, insisting she was doing an inspection. But the evidence was everywhere. The spilled box, the spray, the cameras, the witnesses. One neighbor said they'd been waiting weeks for someone to confront her. Another asked why she'd been targeting me specifically. Every lie she tried to tell only tangled her deeper. And then I stepped outside. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply held up my phone and said, I had the entire incident recorded, along with every previous theft. her face drained of color. The power she'd clung to for years evaporated in seconds. She tried to order me to delete the footage, tried to claim it violated HOA rules to record her. But the neighbors weren't buying it. Someone muttered that she wasn't the one making the rules anymore. And then, the final blow hit. One of the board members, someone she thought still supported her, stepped onto his porch and announced loudly that an emergency meeting would be called. He told her he'd received complaints for months but never had evidence. Now he did, and the entire neighborhood heard him say it. She froze, trembling, covered in the sticky attractant that made her smell like a hive in mid-summer, surrounded by neighbors she once intimidated into silence, exposed by the very resident she tried to crush. That moment, watching her realize that her reign was over, that every ounce of power she'd weaponized had slipped through her fingers, was the climax of everything she'd put me through. She tried to walk away with dignity, but her shoes stuck to the walkway with every step, leaving a trail of residue behind her. A neighbor recorded her retreat. Another snapped photos. A third shook their head and muttered that she had finally gotten exactly what she deserved. By the time she reached the street, one thing was clear: the queen of the HOA had just fallen. And the rest of the story, the fallout, the unraveling of her authority, the consequences she never thought she'd face, was about to begin. The fallout began before the HOA president even made it home. Word spread through the neighborhood in a matter of hours. Faster than any official notice she had ever delivered. Faster than any rumor she'd ever tried to suppress. By that evening, nearly everyone had seen the footage or heard a detailed play-by-play retelling from the neighbors who witnessed it firsthand. And for the first time since I'd moved into that supposedly peaceful community, the balance of power shifted. Not subtly, not politically, dramatically. That night, my inbox filled with messages from neighbors I'd barely spoken to before. Some apologized for not stepping forward sooner. Others admitted they suspected something was off for months, but hadn't wanted to accuse someone with authority. A few had stories of their own: small violations, petty fines, mysteriously missing mail, moments they'd brushed aside because they didn't want to make waves. It was unsettling, in a way, to realize how long fear had shaped the community. But it also made the next steps feel even more necessary. The following afternoon, the HOA board announced an emergency meeting. It wasn't one of those quiet, polite gatherings in a resident's garage or the clubhouse. This one was held outdoors, in a cul-de-sac large enough for half the neighborhood to gather. And they did. People brought lawn chairs. Some stood in clusters. Others leaned against their fences, arms crossed, waiting for answers. The HOA president arrived late, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, her posture stiff, her expression tightly controlled. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't make eye contact. She stood off to the side, pretending she had nothing to be ashamed of, even though every whisper, every glance, every quiet laugh seemed directed at her. When the meeting began, the board member, who'd spoken up during the incident, took the lead. He had printed copies of the footage screenshots. He had timestamps, citations, a timeline of when residents had filed complaints, all of which had been ignored under her leadership. He cleared his throat, held up a stack of papers, and began reading through violations she had committed herself. Conflict of interest abuse, fabrication of fines, unauthorized entry onto residents' property, tampering with deliveries, failure to disclose complaints, misuse of HOA funds to pay for her personal compliance rounds. The list felt endless. Every item revealed a new crack in the image. she'd spent years crafting. She didn't interrupt until he mentioned the footage of her taking packages. Then she snapped, loudly insisting the video was edited, claiming she had temporary authority to inspect suspicious items. She even accused me of entrapment. The crowd murmured in disbelief. Some laughed outright. The board member calmly reminded her that the HOA had no rule allowing anyone, especially the president, to remove packages from a resident's property. Her face flushed red. She tried to regain control, but the board wasn't having it anymore. Then came the motion to remove her from her position immediately. The vote wasn't close. Only one hand went up in her favor. Her own. The rest of the neighborhood, finally free from the grip of her intimidation, voted unanimously to strip her of her title, her access, and her authority. She stood frozen as the board announced that all HOA accounts she controlled would be audited, and that she was suspended from entering anyone's property without permission. When the meeting adjourned, she left quickly, head down, while clusters of neighbors lingered to talk, laugh, and breathe easier for the first time in years. The moment she walked away, defeated, powerless, exposed, felt like the true end of her reign. But the real resolution came in the days and weeks that followed. Within a week, the audits uncovered even more misconduct. She had approved significant expenses without board consent. Everything from personal landscaping upgrades to unnecessary compliance equipment she claimed was for neighborhood security. Some of it she stored in her garage. Some she'd sold online. Residents were stunned. Not because she was capable of it. By then, no one doubted that. But because she'd gotten away with it for so long. The board arranged a full restructuring of HOA policies. Transparent elections, strict limits on unilateral decisions, mandatory board oversight for fines, an enforcement committee separate from leadership, and a new rule requiring residents to receive photographic evidence before any citation could be issued. It was everything the neighborhood should have had from the beginning. And suddenly, people who once feared opening their mailboxes now felt empowered. They started attending meetings, asking questions, challenging decisions, and shaping their own community instead of letting one person control it. As for the former HOA president, she avoided everyone. She stopped walking her old patrol routes. She didn't leave her house unless absolutely necessary. Some neighbors said they saw her putting for sale flyers into her mailbox within a month. Others noticed a moving truck parked outside her home soon after. She left quietly. No goodbyes, no explanations, no last attempt to regain influence. Just gone. As the neighborhood healed, life slowly returned to normal for me. The first day I received a package again without worrying felt surreal. The simple act of picking up a cardboard box from the porch became something I didn't realize I'd missed. A reminder that not everything in life should feel like a battle. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before now waved enthusiastically, struck up conversations, invited me to barbecues. The stigma she'd created around questioning authority dissolved. People felt comfortable sharing stories, frustrations, dreams for a better community. Strangely enough, the conflict brought us together more than any HOA initiative ever had. But the impact wasn't just communal. It was personal. For weeks after everything settled, I kept rewatching the footage. Not because I enjoyed seeing her downfall, but because it reminded me of something easy to forget. Sometimes the biggest dangers aren't from strangers. They're from people who cloak themselves in authority and convince everyone around them that pushing back is wrong. I had almost let that lie control me. I had almost accepted her fines, her intimidation, her unchecked power as something normal. And I wasn't the only one. It made me realize how many people, in neighborhoods, workplaces, families, are governed by someone who shouldn't have been given authority in the first place. Someone who weaponizes rules, who preys on silence, who thrives when people keep their heads down and hope the problem disappears. But problems like that don't go away on their own. They grow until someone stands up, pushes back, and says enough. For me, that moment came after one too many stolen packages. For someone else, it might come after a toxic boss crosses a line. For another, it might come when a neighbor oversteps one boundary too many. The point isn't the conflict itself. It's the courage to face it. And weirdly, ironically, unbelievably, it all started with a box on my porch. Weeks later, after the dust settled, the board asked if I wanted to join them as a resident advisor. Not a leader, not an enforcer, just someone with common sense who could keep things balanced. At first, I said no. I was tired, drained. I didn't want to spend my free time revisiting HOA drama. But as the community continued rebuilding trust, I started realizing something important. Sometimes the best way to prevent abuse is to be part of the system, not outside it. So I accepted. Not because I wanted power, but because I knew what it looked like when power was misused. And I knew the signs well enough to keep it from happening again. The new board worked together more openly. We created digital logs, shared responsibilities, encouraged feedback, and with each passing month, the neighborhood became less about rules and more about actual community. The kind we were supposed to have all along. Even the local police liaison admitted, during a casual visit, that our neighborhood had gone from one of the most complained about to one of the most improved. That felt like victory. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just closure. Good, solid, overdue closure. Years from now, I'll probably laugh about the absurdity of the whole situation. How a petty, power-hungry HOA president unraveled her entire career by stealing boxes worth less than a tank of gas. How a simple trap, one designed to expose the truth rather than harm anyone, became the catalyst that changed everything. But even now, I can still feel the weight of that final moment on the porch. The moment when the community cracked open, and the truth poured out. And every time I pick up a package from my porch, safe, untouched, unbothered, I remember the lesson that stayed with me long after she moved away. Power only works when people believe they can't challenge it. And sometimes, all it takes to bring the whole system down is a single box and the courage to set a trap for the truth. So tell me, if someone like her walked through your neighborhood, would you let them rule over you? Or would you be the one to finally make a stand?